Professor Peter Martin has kindly agreed to step in as the moderator for this session, and thank you so much. Peter is an agricultural economist and a Cornell graduate, and he is, as I said, a professor here in the AEM program. And he has also done work with the Rockefeller Foundation, and he retired from there in 2007. So he will moderate this session, which is on effects of employment and seed subsidies on poverty. So
good. Mona, thank you very much indeed. It is a pleasure to be able to step in and to facilitate this next session, which will last about an hour and a half. We're running a little bit behind time, but we thought it was important to secure everybody's food security, at least for the next 6 hours before we launched into another interesting conversation. We have two speakers in this session, and they'll be doing deep dives, as deep as the time allows, into two interesting areas. One, issues of employment, unemployment, and two issues of input policies in agricultural sector. So our first speaker is Gary Fields. You all know Gary. He is a professor in the economics department. He has an endowed chair in international and comparative labor, and has written and researched extensively on issues of poverty, inequality, and development. So he'll be our first speaker. Our second is Nicole Mason, who is an assistant professor at Michigan State University, assistant professor of international development at MSU, and she works in the food security group, which I trust you're all aware of. It's one of the richest sources. To go to their webpage is really a joy. A very rich amount of analysis and data. And Nicole will be addressing the input policy side with a particular focus, I believe, on subsidies in the seed sector, possibly fertilizer as well. So without taking more time, I'd like to ask Gary, come up, and each will be speaking 20-25 minutes, and then we will break and use the convention that we've been using for the last 2 days for questions and answers.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here and to honor you, Eric. Eric and I have been friends and colleagues for 35 years, and we've shared a lot together. We co-taught, well, I shouldn't say co-taught, we taught in succession the PhD development economics courses at Cornell. We participated and continue to participate regularly in the development economics workshop. And it's a wonderful honor to be able to honor you on this occasion. I'd like to introduce my remarks in three stages: my introduction to Africa, my introduction to Eric's work, my introduction to Eric, which happened sequentially. In my third year of graduate school, my PhD advisor called our apartment one night and asked if my wife and I wanted to accompany him to Kenya for a year. And that was how I became an Africanist. I had never been out of the United States until that time. I had been studying labor economics, worrying about employment problems and things in the United States. I got to Kenya. It took about 2 weeks, and I took the dissertation that I had brought along with me, put it in the drawer, thinking maybe I'd get back to it sometime. I never did. I became completely hooked on the importance of labor market issues in developing countries. I was at the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Nairobi, and it was a fascinating place in 1970 and 1971. There were working papers that were around at that time, written by characters like Harris and Todaro and Stiglitz, and it's just a ferment of intellectual activity. Tobin was the year after me, but Diamond and Stern and a whole group of people, and I thought, gee, these are mainstream economists. Many of them won Nobel Prizes after that, and they were doing important work where they were taking the economics. Mainstream economics and applying it to problems of development. And I saw that as an opportunity. And so I set to work to try to do that. As I was working, and this was after I left Kenya, I came across a paper of Eric's on employment, and that's going to be my topic for today. And then I also found that there was a great deal of ferment about income distribution, both the inequality aspect of income distribution and the poverty aspect. And I thought, well, those things go nicely together. Let's get into that. And then a few years later, while I was teaching at Yale, Cornell asked if I was interested in interviewing for a position here. I didn't have tenure at Yale. Ithaca is a much nicer place to raise a family than New Haven is, so I said, sure, let me come and talk. And Eric was the chairman of the Department of Economics at that time, and that was my first introduction to Eric Thorbeck as a person. And as I say, we've continued to be friends and colleagues for a long time. So this paper is about the employment problem in developing countries, and this was Eric's one very important paper of Eric's, and the very first one of his that I came to know. In 1973, he published a review paper that synthesized the results of 4 ILO missions that had been sent to Kenya, what was then Ceylon and is now called Sri Lanka, Iran, and Colombia. And Eric brought out some ideas, some lessons, some to-dos, some not-to-dos, based on what he had seen in those reports. That was published in 1973. Now, 40 years later, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting in a conference in Eric's honor to talk about those ideas and which ones from before are ones that we would carry through today and were good ideas that have stood the test of time, and which ones are in those reports are ones that today we would do differently, and what would we do differently, and that's what I want to talk about in this presentation. So there are 10 important ideas that I want to bring forward in about 1 minute each, because that's about how much time I have, and to try to use this as a way of saying to the people in the room what development economics has become, not entirely, but partly, is a field of intellectual arbitrage. That is, taking ideas that come from one branch of economics and carrying them into the study of development with appropriate modifications. And I, as a trained labor economist, I continue to be a professor of labor economics as well as a professor of development economics, have been trying to do that specifically in labor market analysis and in the area of poverty and inequality, which is where Eric and I have two major areas of overlap in our interests. So these 10 ideas then. The first is that when we talk about employment and unemployment in this field, there are agreed upon definitions that have been put forward by the ILO, the International Labor Organization. And the ILO uses these definitions. They recommend them to countries. They're used in just about every country of the world, including, I think, every African country without exception. And it's important to understand what the concepts of employment and unemployment are as we move forward in this session. Employment, according to ILO definitions, you are said to be employed if you worked even 1 hour last week for pay, or if you worked 15 hours or more not for pay. Now, working 1 hour for pay doesn't mean that you're fully and gainfully employed, but that's what the ILO calls employment. And so when you see statistics coming from the ILO or from countries like the United States, like the countries in Africa that use the ILO definition, that's what it means to be employed. Okay? Now, unemployment would be people who were not employed by that definition, but people who last week were actively looking for work. That means they have to have tried to do something in order to get a job. They're not just waiting there hoping that a job will appear. They have to have gone out and interviewed with an employer or sent in a resume or visited a government employment office, something of that kind, in order to be counted as being unemployed. And so the term, the employment problem, that the ILO had set, that the OECD had set, that Eric worked on in his paper, it's about two things. It's about the people who are unemployed and literally did no work for pay last week and were actively looking for work. They are part of the employment problem, but in addition, there are all these people who are employed, who worked for very low hourly wages, who had limited number of work hours or limited number of work days, and who are not earning enough so that they and themselves and their families are able to escape from poverty. And so this focus on poverty, this is something that Eric and I talked about many times. It's something we share. And the idea of looking at people's work as a means of escaping from poverty is a concern, an approach to development that we have had in common for all these years. So what the world has, what Africa has, what other parts of the world have, is an employment problem, not just an unemployment problem. Now, this is important because it says, yes, we want to be concerned about jobs, but we also want to be concerned about how good those jobs are, how much they pay, how stable they are, what kinds of working conditions they have, and that is also a part of our analysis. Okay. Now, how do we go about analyzing jobs, analyzing labor markets? Well, let me start with a fiction. It's a fiction that in PhD programs in economics we start with and many times do not move beyond. The fiction is one of a single unified labor market where the market clears, where everybody participates in the same labor market as everybody else, where supply and demand for labor intersect and the wage is determined according to that, so everybody is employed and nobody is unemployed. And the reason I say that's a fiction is because it doesn't apply to the real world. What it does apply to the real world is that labor markets are stratified and they're segmented, and that's a much better way to look at the world's employment problem. By stratified labor markets, what I mean is that there are people, including all of us in this room, who are university graduates or soon to be university graduates who enter the labor market and enter in a higher stratum than people who have less education than we do or that some of us will have upon graduating. We have different options available to us. And the people in Africa who have not been able to go to school at all or who have very limited schooling are in yet a lower stratum. So these strata all operate separately from one another. People want to move up to a higher stratum. Very few people want to move down to a lower stratum. So that's what I mean by a stratified labor market. A segmented labor market would mean that for a given stratum, for workers of a given type with a given skill level, to use economist language, people with a given level of human capital, there's such a thing as good jobs and bad jobs. In the Harris-Tadaro model, to take one example, was built in Kenya. All the workers were the same in that model. Some of them went to urban areas and got hired into high-wage jobs. Some of them went to urban areas and didn't get hired into high-wage jobs and became unemployed and earned nothing. And then there were people who stayed in rural areas, worked in agriculture, and were in between those who earned the high wage and those who earned nothing. But they were all the same kinds of people. It's just some of them were lucky and some of them were not. Okay, now labor markets are segmented in that sense that for each of us and for each worker, there's such a thing as a good job and a bad job. And that in turn raises the question of how can there be more good job opportunities, which is a major policy question that this work addresses. We want to recognize that not all jobs are the same and need to conduct our positive analysis and our policy analysis with that in mind. The reports, and in particular the Kenya report, emphasized informal sector. Informal sector, it's kind of hard to talk about. And that's because what they did in the Kenya report, and Eric highlighted this in his International Labor Review paper, is that they said the informal sector consists of the following 7 characteristics. And it listed 7 characteristics, connecting them with the word and. And then it said the formal sector is the obverse of these, and it had the 7 opposite characteristics connected with the word and. Well, if all jobs had either all 7 of the one group or all 7 of the other group, it'd be pretty straightforward. We know what's formal and what's informal. But what if a job has 5 of these characteristics and not the other 2? Well, do we call it partially formal, partially informal? No, we don't call it that. So what do we call it? We kind of hedge. We don't have a good definition. But what the ILO report did, and what Eric did in his analysis of that report, and where the field has moved on to, is to recognize that this sector is important. It's important in terms of people's earnings and livelihoods. It's important in terms of the overall earning opportunities of people and jobs, and it's not a drag on the economy, quite the opposite. The economy would be much worse off if the informal sector didn't exist. I'm reminded of Mayor Kenyatta, the daughter of the first President Kenyatta. Update my terminology. Mayor Kenyatta would send the city council bulldozers into the slums of Nairobi in order to try to knock down the houses of the people who made their living in the informal sector. So the people just took their cardboard shacks and they literally carried them out of the way of the bulldozers. And the bulldozers came by and then they put them back up and went back to sleep in the middle of the night. It was a really lousy social policy. But leaving that aside, to understand that there exists this informal sector is important. Then later, after the ILO reports came out, to recognize the existence of an informal economy that includes not only people who are working in the informal sector, but people who are working informally in the formal part of the economy. That is, people who are working for registered employers, but they're casual employees. They get hired for a day or they get hired for a week, or they get hired for 89 days because on the 90th day, job protections apply. And these people are part of this larger informal employment that is a newer idea that in some sense has replaced informal sector by encompassing it but going beyond it. The reports recognize the importance of self-employment and own account work. The terminology isn't entirely clear here. Self-employment is where people work for themselves. Own account work is, by one bit of terminology, people who are self-employed and employ no others. If I'm self-employed and I employ somebody to help me out, I would be self-employed, but I wouldn't be an own account worker because somebody else is working for me or working with me. That terminology is sometimes used. And one of the things that the reports brought out that Eric highlighted that I think was absolutely right in it is that the reason that people are working in self-employment is that they couldn't get wage employment. They couldn't get hired into the kinds of jobs they wanted in the upper part of the labor market, so they did something else. I'm reminded of the people I saw in Kenya, the people who saved up enough money to buy a pack of 20 cigarettes and then would sell them to poor people one at a time at a higher unit price, and that's how they made their living. Or the people who went back to the family farm on the weekend and returned with whatever vegetables they had that were there. And at the traffic circle near where we lived in Nairobi, there was this guy who used to be there, and every Monday or Tuesday morning, I would stop by and see what he had for sale. And so one week it was peas that he had taken out of the pods and put in little cellophane bags, and I would buy those, and another time it would be some other kind of vegetable or something. That's how he made his living. That's not how he wanted to make his living. I asked him, he told me, he said, no, I'd really like to work in a factory. I'd really like to work in an office. I'd really like to work cleaning hotel rooms. But they don't hire me or people like me in sufficient numbers for me to be able to get this kind of work. Another term that was used in literature is the term labor absorption. And the analysis was that there was insufficient labor absorption, that the pool of workers available didn't get absorbed into employment. Now, that's one I don't like. I'm not saying that Eric did this, I'm just saying that Eric reported it. And the idea of labor absorption, the idea that there are these passive agents who just kind of get absorbed and sucked into employment, it just isn't right, okay? There are some people who get offered jobs and happily take them. There are other people who don't get hired, who want to get hired. Why are employers not hiring them? It's because they don't need as many workers, and they don't who are available. They don't want as many workers as they could perhaps hire because of the wages being what they are. This is the mainstream economist in me saying that people supply labor services, employers demand labor services, wages are set by supply and demand by minimum wage authorities and others. We need to have active voice sentences with active identified agents doing active identified things, and labor absorption is way too passive for my taste. And so if we want to know why are the number of people employed the way they are, why is the number employed what it is, the simplest answer is the number employed is the number of people who are there. Okay? And why is that the number employed? Because in Africa, people are too poor to be unemployed for long periods of time and do nothing and earn nothing for an entire week. And so understanding that there's making the best of a bad situation is, I think, the way to understand it. Now, the reports give a lot of attention to productive employment. And my problem with this is I don't know when employment is productive and when it's unproductive, at least using the kinds of definitions that the ILO used. They defined it as, or not defined it, but they kind of talked about it as you're in unproductive employment if you earn too little. Okay? But that's not a statement about how productive you are. That's a statement about how much you get paid for the productivity that you've generated. And slavery, of course, is the extreme case of people who produce a lot and get paid nothing. But there are a lot of other people who produce a lot and get paid very little because they've agreed to work for very little. Why did they agree to work for very little? Because lots of other people are willing to work for very little. And they all come together in a market, and that's what determines what the rate of pay is. That's understandable to us from the point of view of labor economics, and I think it's a more helpful way of looking at how much people get paid when they work than the idea of looking at their productivity. The eighth idea, this is one where Eric has made an important contribution and I have made no contribution whatsoever, is the importance of a consistency framework. And that is to say that what a lot of these reports did is that they made projections of how much employment there would be in the future. I forgot which country it was where they predicted that within 7 years they'd be able to double the amount of employment. And that didn't transpire, but furthermore, it seemed completely unrealistic. Now, what Eric did in his work after he wrote this paper was he was simultaneously working on developing social accounting matrices and working in computable general equilibrium models and things. And I remember that when I came to Cornell, Eric, and interviewed for that faculty position. You gave me one of your books on social accounting matrices, and that's when I really learned about all the important work you were doing on consistency framework. I'm way too inconsistent to work on consistency frameworks, and so I didn't develop that. But I wanted to mention it because it's a rightful criticism of what the ILO reports had not done, and it's a valuable contribution of what you have done. Now, priority policy challenges. One of the big criticisms of the ILO work is that it had so many things that it called for that it basically didn't prioritize anything. And in the management literature, which I've probably read more of than is good for me, the management people say, if you say you've got 10 priorities, you don't know what you're talking about. 10 is way too many. You need at most 3. And I would go a step further, and this is where Eric and I, again, are in full agreement, is that within those 3, there's one that takes precedence above all others, and that is reducing poverty. And I would just add reducing absolute poverty. The absolute economic misery in the world is the main problem that Eric and I see, the main problem we work to combat, and I think the main problem that policies with regard to development and policies with regard to labor markets should address. And so by setting that as a priority, there would be some things that policymakers would choose to do, and there would be other things that they would choose not to do. Such as pay full scholarships for students from Africa to come and attend Cornell University at home country government expense, right? And that's very nice, and we're happy to receive such students here. But it's not clear that that is the best and most effective way to reduce poverty. And there would be other things that would take precedence. So by stressing, by clarifying what is the maximand, what is the minimand, that this is a way forward, an important way forward in then deciding what to do. Okay, last is a policy evaluation framework. Policy evaluation framework, some of you are students in my classes, you've heard this before. Every class I teach, in the policy work I do, in the professional writing, my publications, I try to stress that a policy evaluation framework has 5 parts. It is, what is the policy instrument? What is the model being used to analyze that policy instrument? What are the outcomes that come from applying that policy instrument to a model? What is the policy evaluation criterion, or what are the policy evaluation criteria if there's more than one of them? And what is the policy evaluation judgment? And that framework is very important, because what it does is that it suggests to us that we need to consider consequences, we need to consider our evaluation functions, we need to consider social costs, we need to consider social benefits. And there's a lot of work that's being done that does not involve that kind of policy evaluation framework. There's a lot of work that's being done that says, that uses what I think of as false syllogisms. One false syllogism is, this group has a problem, we need to help the poor where they are, therefore we need to do this. A second false policy syllogism is, we seek to help the poor, we need to help the poor get out of where they are, and therefore we need to do something else. A third policy syllogism is, both of those are good ideas, let's do some of each. And none of those is necessarily logical and necessarily the right way to go about it. And so by being explicit about what our criteria are and trying to use such a framework, I think we can make better policy judgments if we pursue this. And that kind of analysis was largely absent from the ILO reports, as Eric pointed out in his paper, and upon rereading one of them recently, I came to that conclusion as well. So we have a lot of good ideas that have stood the test of time over the last 40 years. We have some ideas that I wish we would get rid of, and we have some others that we're in the process of refining. And that's the way that social science works. The social sciences takes the best ideas from the past, keeps the good ones, throws out the bad ones, replaces them by others. And the challenge moving forward is to try to work on this in a way, I think, that conveys that helps to develop our understanding of what it is that would work to make a positive difference, so that we can help the people out there who are the targets of all of this policy analysis. So Eric has pointed the way forward in many respects, and it's been an absolute delight to have shared 35 years with you here at Cornell in that regard. Thank you.